least understand where it's coming from. Got it. So these are the problems that we've been working on, and I want to show you some examples of how we've been doing this. Then we'll break into some focus groups, talk about what's good or bad about those examples, and then we'll come back and we'll show you what the research says about those examples so that we can have more discussion. If you're ready for that, and I'm looking around, faces are generally ready, doing the pausing for questions, awkward silence. Here we go. Here's one example of a public exam style question. Because we're all coming from different fields, I grabbed one that is not science-based. So we're a little bit more on equal footing. This is an exam question that you might find in a very traditional style. There is nothing wrong with it. It's just traditional. I'm going to give you 20 seconds or so to read this on your own because you can understand it much more quickly than I can read it to you. Go for it. I don't know if there are any naval military historians in the room. If you are, you're way ahead of the rest of us. But this question asks students to pick an answer from a list of possible answers, of which one or maybe even multiple are correct. And then it asks them to explain. There is nothing wrong with this style of examination. In fact, using different kinds of models is more likely to treat different kinds of brains well. Here's how we might treat this in a public exam style. About a week ahead of the exam, we would give them this. Now, you're going to see some of the information is really similar. This is intended to test the same concepts. Again, I'll give you 20 seconds or so to see what you find. Carlos, that is perfect. Thank you. You can tell where the prevailing winds are going. Now, if this is like any other audience with which I have discussed public exams, some of you are saying, Ben, I've done this before. And that is absolutely true. These are not unique methods. We are not geniuses. So please do not be put off. In fact, please get in touch with us because we want to expand the network of people who are already working on these things. What we're trying to do here is a few things. We're framing the question, and we're not framing the question in the moment, in the lecture hall, but a week ahead of time, they can see what we're trying to do. In addition to giving them some of the background, there's data for analysis. We want our students to be scientists who can analyze data, so we're explicitly asking them to do this work with rich data. Much more data that you can possibly analyze in the 2 minutes you might have in a timed exam. But here, with time, and especially with the work of their teammates and colleagues in studying, they can analyze this data using some of the concepts from class. Now, we have hidden some of the data. Students don't know what the question is. If they know what the question is, they don't know what the data is. If they know both of those things, there's some other degree of freedom. So students can't pre-write every part of this exam. They know there's going to be questions and they can see how many points they're worth. They know that they're going to focus on either the French ships or the English ships, but we're still hiding that from them. And lastly, the actual question text in this particular question number 4, that is the real question. This isn't a study guide where they go indirectly to kind of bounce and find out what's important, but this is actually what we want them to know. It's still gradable. It's still very missable because students don't know all the information going into it. Because this one refers to explain your reasoning. Sorry, it should say explain your reasoning for question 3. So they'll use their knowledge about the English ship for question 4. Now on the final version of the actual exam, students will walk into the room and find this. These are the only pieces that have changed. All of the data is the same. And now students have either guessed this question, but much more likely worked with this data in a way that the concepts have come out, and hopefully they can give us really high level answers here. I love talking about this, but I really should pause for questions. Do you have any questions about this example before I go on and show you a STEM example that's similar?
Can I ask, so this is my being new to this. I expected students to collaborate during the exam, but you want them to collaborate before the exam.
We absolutely want our students to study together. It tends to make our students more efficient. So for students who are not from traditional college success backgrounds, that tends to be really helpful, especially for students who work, who have jobs, who are commuting, have different family situations than your average 19-year-old. During the exam, we want to know what they know. And we think there are lots of environments where that kind of extractive figuring out what knowledge is there really is important. But we'd like them to do a lot of the work before it together if possible. They don't have to. You don't need other people to succeed on these exams. Talitha, that's a really good question. Trevor, can I go to you?
Yeah, just on the stuff that you withhold, right? And now I've added in something like damaged.
Yep.
I'm guessing from context, it would, like, from what you've talked about in class, it's apparent what kinds of things could be could go in the withheld, or does that get given of, like, here's things we could ask you about?
Yeah, in this particular course, so naval military history, students are going to be thinking about, where are the lines of engagement? How does that interact with the wind direction? How does that interact with the prevailing structures of forces? And so which ship is most likely to be damaged is not a piece they should have memorized. It's a thing you can figure out from the data. Yeah, thank you for that. Really important question. Okay, I'm going to jump across here to show you a STEM example, which now we can probably go through fairly quickly. Even if you do not do genetics on a daily basis, you're going to see some pretty similar things here. So we're asking about wild type and mutated sequences. We're asking them to identify the kind of mutation. So pretty common type of question, and explain why they chose that. Again, there is nothing wrong with this type of question in any way. We do think we can do better. And so what we think is a better version of this is this example. So here we have a wild type mRNA sequence. Sequence D is given. Sequence E and F are held back. So they're not going to get those until they walk into the room. And then we can ask them these questions. Of these three mutated sequences, which are most likely to be functional? Which are least likely to be functional? And tell us something about that. Now we think explicitly we are asking students to study into the exam. They can sit around a whiteboard and draw out their own sequences, make their own examples, practice dynamically. And I think crucially, what the exam question is no longer, have you deserved brain space in your professor's head? It's now, we're all doing science together. You can come up with examples just as well as I can. We've pointed out that, again, framing for the question is available beforehand. There's data for analysis, there's hidden data, and then there's actual question text that students can work on. Greg, I bet you have something important to say here. Let you jump in.
For this question, Ben, would the students have a copy of the genetic code table as well?
Yes, thank you for that. Absolutely. I was a geneticist for a good while. I never memorized the codon table, so if anybody else has, you are just way smarter than me. Yeah, thank you for that. When students actually walk into the room, you're probably not going to be surprised that they're going to walk in to see just 2 more sequences. If you were the kind of student, I'm going to hypothesize here, if you were the kind of student that might be coming to science classes worried that you don't fit the kind of person who can be a scientist, I think you're much more likely to walk into the room and be calmer when you've already seen a lot of the stuff on the paper, even if that doesn't really affect your grade. It's an opportunity to get into the exam to see how it works with days instead of seconds to understand it. Now, that's just my hypothesis. So let me do this. Do I want to give you an overall?
Before we go on,
yeah,
is it
please.
open book other than the codon table?
almost all of the exams, all of the examples I'm going to show you are all closed book completely. So this is the structure of students walk into a room and take the exam is very traditional. And we're trying to do non-traditional things in those constraints. Now, if you have the opportunity to do group exams, to do two-stage exams, to do things like test question templates, if you have those opportunities, I think you should. This is a way that we have found instructors can be really successful even within a highly constrained system. Linda, you are asking about the timeline. May I please show you the timeline? So here's a public exam, or first, this is a way of diagramming out a traditional exam. So some things in exams are transparent to students, some things are secret to students. So if the exam is that big red scary block over there, then you do all the work of developing and editing your exam in secret. Students study in parallel, wondering what's behind the curtain, and then you all meet up at the biggest, scariest point. A public exam, then, we're going to put a lot more stuff out in the open. So most of your writing can be totally public. If a student walks into my office while I'm writing an exam, I don't cover up anything until the very last pieces. So we, people who do this kind of style, put out a public exam for students, aiming for a week ahead of time. Students can edit and they can contribute to the exam because they can see it. We use those student edits, put out a second version of the exam, and then all we're doing in secret at the end is really editing those last little bits. What goes into the hidden data? Students can be studying and reviewing, throughout, hopefully spreading out a bit farther from the exam. And then we hope we're treating the language barriers because students are given a chance to tell us what parts of the language are bad. And I cannot tell you how many times I've written exam questions and had students come up to me and say, I cannot believe that you've made 3 recursive statements in the same sentence. I'm like, well, that makes sense to me because I hear it in my words. And then students will say, why don't you write it like this? Invariably, the exams get better and easier to read. We hope they're studying right from the exam itself. So we're directing them more closely to core concepts. Students have more time to think about the exam material. And then lastly, there's more material and more of the process is out in the open. So we hope that we're engendering more trust with our students. Before I take questions here, if you're interested, there's a longer, drier, quite boring description of the entire system with a lot of logistics in it. And this, I think, is a good point to pause and see if you have questions. Kathy asked if the final exams are like this too. Yes, absolutely. Once I started doing this for me personally, I'm never going back. And other people who have taken them up, I have yet to meet anyone who hasn't tried a little bit and started expanding more broadly. It makes it more fun. Melinda asks, how long do you have between exams? For the biggest classes where I use this, 2 weeks between exams. So exam, the next week they're getting a public exam to work on and then write in. So we just go exam every 2 weeks. And Brenda asked, during a semester, if the University of Washington had semesters, we might spread things out. We're on the quarter system, so it's 10 weeks, 5 exams. Go, 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 go. And then Kirsten asked, how do you apprentice students into this process? Oh, that's very new to most of them. Excellent. We do, and in the full description, there's lots of framing bits about how we introduce, what we talk about when, some of the wording that we use on exams or on assignments. But I think probably the most important part is that on the first version of the public exam, students have a survey where for participation credit, they have to find either a problem with the exam and tell us what it is. They have to find a place where they can make up a question and give us the answer, or they have to tell us, I don't have time for this now and I'm not going to do it. All 3 get full credit, but we get a huge pile of corrections and we also get lots of students thinking about the exam earlier. And I think that's probably a crucial step to helping bringing students into that. These are great questions. I think I might have gotten all of them. Feel free to repost a question if I missed it. Janie asks, do you give students any class time to discuss the material before the exam? When we're doing a good job, yes. And this is a great way to, there's your review session. Hey, everybody, take out a piece of paper, grab your public exam from online, write a question into the form of the exam, and we just pull sheets of paper down from people and say, okay, great. The review question is this, and students make up excellent possible questions. And even when they're not that great, it's probably not that great for a scientific reason that you can talk about. But I want to speed ahead here just a little because I want to get you talking. This is, I think, the most valuable part. So please, as we, and I think, Carlos, you're going to help me with this. We're going to go into breakout rooms of about 3 or 4 people. Please introduce yourselves. And then the questions I'd love for you to discuss with whatever else bubbles up are, would this style of exam or style of question work in your classrooms? And then, partially independent of that, what are the advantages and disadvantages for students? I want to mine all of your brain power to make this project better. But given our limitations, let's do this for about 8 minutes total. Carlos, does that sound reasonable?
Yes. So
Beautiful.
aiming for 4 people per breakout.
I think that's
5.
perfect. Then even if somebody can't contribute because of their own limitations or bandwidth, then at least that group has 3.
Perfect.
Let's see.
Okay, and that sounds good.
Yeah, you can
Let
start
me
it.
open.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I will see you in 8 minutes.
My trusty calculator.
All right. And if anybody is trying to get in a room and you can't, please speak
Let
up.
us know and we can.
But I think this is mostly program team, right?
Not Luria or Colleen, so Carlos
Okay.
will try to push them out to their rooms. They may be having trouble.
Yeah, let's find out how we can do that.
And Ben, I want to say thank you. I'm sorry I have to run.
Oh, of course.
But thanks so much for joining us again today and doing this. It looks like you've got a good turnout and a great engagement.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good to see you again, and hope the next time isn't long.
Hope not. Bye, everybody else.
On the
Have a good
move, Luria.
rest of the time.
Karen, are you going to go to room 8?
I think the group of y'all can see the breakout rooms, but I think I
yeah.
cannot.
Room
Oh.
8 only had 2 people.
Oh, no, I
Oh,
can.
does it? Okay, I'll go talk to roommate.
Great, thank you.
Later.
Yeah, I sent one person to group 8. I love your mRNA example, and we just did. I tripped up on some mRNA stuff this week, and I'm like, oh, that would have been a fantastic week.
This will just be for the small group, but I don't know if I'll mention this, but man, the thing it changes the most, and this is totally anecdotally, I have no research behind it, is that for years, I would talk about mRNA and mutations, and at the end of the class, a student would come down and say, almost verbatim, I don't understand any of this. What is mRNA? And then after we started going to a public style, where students could figure out kind of what kinds of questions are coming and really practicing that, you get a student invariably coming down to the front of class and saying, I don't understand any of it. If it's a frame shift and a premature stop, I get that you need to classify it one way or the other, but how do you tell the likely impact without translating the entire protein? It's like, you just said that you didn't understand it, but you clearly
yes.
and that level of questioning, that's how I get my hooks into people, because they do it just a little bit of public style. They start those conversations instead of the I don't know what's happening conversations, and then they don't go back.
It's
like,
the
oh.
transparency of having this. This is similar. This is what you'll encounter later on, right?
Yeah. And study guides are great, right? Study guides are way better than nothing. But they don't, it's not exact. It's an abstraction of the actual exam.
Here's another anecdotal question. Now I'm being bad and abusing
Oh,
your
do it.
time. I wonder how often you now get questions like, oh, that was a trick question on the exam, or oh, that exam was tricky.
I will tell you virtually never. So I have my holy grail, which I have never hit, but really close, is that with 400 people in an exam room, we have TAs moving all over the place and we're there. And so students can ask questions of people to get some clarification. And we've gotten it down to, in an hour-long exam, we get 1 or maybe 2 questions total, because they already know most of the stuff. And I think there's part of it where the stuff they're reading for the first time, there's just so much more trust that it's probably not a trick.
Mm.
So that I think has been huge, but also, I mean, I write questions all the time. It's like, oh, that's so genius, Ben, you've done it again. This is perfect. And then a student will say, this doesn't make any sense. I don't know that word. This structure, like you're pointing to 2 different verbs here. Which one is it? And it's like, oh, right. Simplify. And the exams are so much more in human than they are in like Ben's brain. It's gotta help.
I'm
Wow.
actually still recording. Are you guys okay with this?
Oh, yeah. None of this is secret.
Because you said you wouldn't mention some of it.
Oh, yeah. Well, if anybody watches the recording, it's bonus. I hope something in here is valuable. I just don't have research backing for those like higher level anecdotes. So they're usually not, if somebody asks the question, I'd love talking about it, but I do want to stick to the research backing mostly.
Gotcha. I'm going to pop into my breakout rooms. I'll stop the recording, pop out, and remind me to turn it back on.
Thank
For sure.
you. Thank you, Tully.
Yeah. Right on. We are back from commercials. No, actually, we're back from really good discussion. And you hit the button already, and people are still in the rooms. So probably we're getting really rich discussion. I've had classes where people bounce back instantly. Oh, they were done. And other times where they kind of leak in, and it's like, oh, if it's half the class comes back immediately, there's probably some kind of nucleating effect of good discussion leaders in some groups. But this is awesome. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. As you're coming back, if there are thoughts that resonated with your group, if you don't mind sharing, please throw them into the chat. Anything you put there will help our discussion. I'll give people, I think we're all back. So any thoughts you want to put into the chat would be fantastic. If there are burning questions, if there are big, like this is a theme, I'd love to hear it. Or we could move on to research, and I'm happy going in any direction here. Oh, awesome. Awesome. So Dustin, what one of the comments is, students who have a social network already in place may be at a distinct advantage. I completely agree. And I think they may have already been before this. But that is a good point. Like we may want to do some modeling of how you reach out to people and find those training partners. Sarah says, I used this in a 300 level undergrad course, and I found that students needed coaching on how to use the public exam. That's really important. Sarah, thank you for mentioning that. Kirsten asks, have you implemented this across courses within a department? Yeah, so in a large department where we do a lot of these, students have now seen this in multiple courses, so they need a lot less of that coaching, right? This is a new style for a lot of people. And we get a lot more demand in the upper division courses where students are saying, oh, wait, we have to go back to normal exam? Why can't we do this other thing? I'll show you some of their requests as well. Rob says, our group was concerned with material that was not asked about on exams. Absolutely. Your public exam is a way to point people towards your most important stuff. How open-ended those things are will give you a little bit more scope than you can actually ask about. But this is true. You are going to point students away from things that you think are less important and towards things that you think are more important. And Clark, can you tell me what you mean by this? If you don't mind.
Okay, yeah, the first comment, we were just thinking, okay, this whole design of question is going to be very, very challenging.
Mhm.
And so I could envision the first draft of my questions, there'd be a lot of give and take with the students.
Mhm.
And the question would evolve a lot between my initial draft and the question.
Yep.
And so then the question is sort of how many cycles of exams before it kind of reaches an equilibrium where we as instructors would be better at writing the questions, and that the question wouldn't change so much between my first draft and the student's exam.
Right. This is a great point. So part of the value of your first draft of the question is it can signify what is the topic area that's important. So a well-written question, a poorly written question, they might both say respiration enzymes. And that's at least a clue to students about something that you value. But getting deeper into that, if I were to convince you that this is a good idea, and Clark, you came to me and said, great, how do I start writing my first entire public exam? My absolute strongest message would be, let's back up. Let's do one public style question the next chance you get. Try one and then plan on not doing one on the next exam after that. Just see how that one feels. Give yourself a chance to look at it. When other people have done this, when they've tried one, they generally go to two and then to three. And going from three, once you've had a couple tries up to the whole exam, is much, much easier. You'll start to get a good instinct for what students are looking at, rather than let's try to whole hog an entire exam. I think that's really important. Thank you for that. Melinda asked, does doing just one public style question confuse students? In my experience, no. It's, hey, for question 4, here's some data you're going to work on next week. And students are generally like, oh, okay, I'll fold that into my studying. They will need some coaching when they get to the entire exam, because you're trying to do a whole different thing. But that has, at least in our hands, worked pretty well. Okay, I do want to show you, instead of just Ben's ideas, we have gone pretty rigorously into trying to figure out if this works at all. So I'm going to give you a very quick research talk. Our basic flow is that we want better outcomes. We go to the literature, we go to lots and lots of practitioners who are experts, and we try to find funding to design using the best practices in education. So this is an evidence-based practice if we just stopped here. But we want to go to the second level of, from a research standpoint, does it work? And hopefully get some funding to do that. And we need to ask first about things like safety and equity, transferability between different kinds of institutions, and can our instructors even do this work? If I were to ask you to do public exams and just double your exam writing time, that's a complete non-starter. It has to be at least close to neutral. Once we've ascertained that those are okay, we started by doing qualitative interviews and talking with lots of students really deeply. We used those to build quantitative surveys to try to scale up our research. And we also did some open-ended question and mining into those open-ended questions. And we hope that these triangulate with an understanding of a quantified qualitative research plan. So if you nerd out on research plans, then you're welcome. But I'm going to jump in and show you some of the stuff that we've done. This first slide, I'm going to go through way too quickly, but I think it's important to put safety and transferability up front instead of it being a thing that we leave to the end. We wanted to know if public exams exacerbate gaps in higher education between groups who traditionally have privilege in college and those that don't. And what we found is that those gaps are real, they are pernicious, and they are not made any worse by public exams. If this was not true, if public exams made these things worse, we would have stopped immediately. That's a non-starter for everything else. but it at least doesn't make problems of equity in college worse. That takes us to, what about different contexts? Well, I can't embed a researcher at every kind of institution that there are. So we took a large R1 and we took a community college and we said, that's going to give us at least some scope. We went in and we did similar kinds of research, especially qualitative research with students from both environments, and tried to match classes. And we found that we're seeing the same kinds of thematic answers. If you are not a qualitative person, you may hear this as, sounds like they just did a bunch of talking. And us qualitative researchers, we have to say, yeah, that's kind of what it is. But the way that we code it, the way that we research it has good rigor to it. So we at least think that this can work across contexts. I said we're going through this way too quickly, and I meant it, but I want to get into some of the things that we did with students' own words. We asked them in many, many hours of interviews to tell us about our themes. Did they see language barriers? Were they directed to core concepts? Were they thinking more deeply? Were they authentically involved? And we have lots of quotes about all of these things. We also found a couple other themes down at the bottom that came out, that emerged from our data. Students talked about collaboration a lot, about the public exams being a way to bring students together with a common foe, and anxiety. We asked about deeper thought and they told us things about anxiety. We asked about language barriers and it became an anxiety conversation. And so we couldn't ignore that signal. It became an emergent theme for us. I will leave these quotes for your own reading in case you're interested. But what we did with these things is we use those to go in and these are now the 6 themes that we're going to look for. In parallel, we asked students how they felt about public exams. So we set up a large class in this kind of quasi-experiment. So after 2 exams in which students had a mix of public style and traditional style questions, once they've had that mix and this controls in the same class for student experience, content, student-instructor relationship. It was spring of 2021, so it controls for the general everything about the world a little bit. And we asked them, do you want to keep the same ratio of public to traditional questions? Do you want more traditional questions or do you want more public questions? This is a one-shot look. There is only so much information you can get from a survey. And we did see some signal that students would appreciate more of the public style questions. But we need to repeat this experiment. So what we did is we said, okay, you want more? We'll give you more. Here's 20-5 ratio, a 4-to-1, more public. Let's see if this holds up. And we asked them again. After that 3rd exam, what do you want to do? And now 2/3 of them said that they liked the ratio of about 20-5. And about a 4-to-1 ratio said we would even like more public exam questions rather than less. That's a nice data point. We wanted to push it even farther if we could, and we had another exam that we could do IRB approved research on. So this time with that same 20-5 ratio, we said, now you have to choose. If you wanted to, you have to either increase or decrease the number of public questions. And somewhat overwhelmingly, students said, well, if we have to choose, and maybe we're getting at those 2/3 that said the ratio is fine, they're saying, well, if we have to choose, we want more public style questions. If you believe this, and I hope that you are here to be skeptical, then it doesn't tell us anything about why students might like this. That's what I'm going to jump into now. We have lots of data from these students in their open-ended written questions, where we ask them across courses, across institutions, did the style of exams in this course work for you? And tell us why. And then we went into those things and we coded them in a way that was blind to their environment. So the coders have no idea what kind of courses they're coding from. And we scored them for these 6 categories. So if a student said, I felt like I had some say in my own exam, I'd say, that sounds like authentic involvement. It's also the kind of thing that aligns really well with best practices in education. So we're going to call this a positive. See another one. Oh, the public exam made it harder to know what I needed to know. That sounds like directing to core concepts, but that's a negative. Now, it's important that we didn't do this based on what students enjoyed. This student says, I hate public exams because they force me to think more deeply. We're going to code that as deeper thought, but that's definitely a positive. We're mining student experiences to find what might be valuable to their education. And then this kind of thing comes up all the time. Internet connection problems at my house made this really frustrating. Well, that has nothing to do with the public exam system. That's a negative, and we're going to score that as not public exam. The reason that we did this with all of the quotes that had nothing to do with the public exam system, and there were a lot, is that we need a control group. We could naively say our control group is 1-to-1 positive to negative, but students don't report an equal number of positives and negatives. So to be more conservative, we used the not public exam quotes as our control group. They were about 2-to-1 positive to negative. So this is much more conservative than just using a 1-to-1. And that's what we use to compare our p-values for our quantitative coding. We are going through this way too fast, but it is fun and I want to get your thoughts. The results are here. And what I most want to do is give you 20 seconds to look at these. Please throw comments into the chat. Throw your hand up. Let's hear what you think. Hillary, would you start us off, please?
I just want to say that I'm kind of shocked by the second and third line items that you didn't find an impact. Were you shocked by that? And what do you think is the explanation?
I would love to have 1 million test subjects. So it's possible there's something still there one way or another, and we just don't have the power to see it. But students don't report about their own language barriers very often. Some of that may be in our test population that they don't want to talk about that. Some of it might be it's just not often on the table. Do students often use words that mean I was authentically involved in the process? Not for college learning, in my experience, a lot. So I wouldn't say disappointed. I wasn't shocked, but it would have been interesting to see. And I'm very much not shocked that some of my hypotheses don't come out. That's hypotheses, right? We were really invigorated to see that overall the impact is positive in our assessment of what's helping students learn or not. That positive assessment is coming largely from students feeling directed better to what they should know, students thinking more deeply and recognizing that they're thinking more deeply, and then students' anxiety being decreased by this style. Now, in 2018, I cared a lot about anxiety. In 2022, it's like all alarms are blaring for me about the kinds of damage that anxiety is doing to cognitive loads and to overall success. And so that emerging from one kind of data and then really popping out of another kind of data, they're telling us something, and I hope we have the ears to listen to it. That was the gist of our summary. And Carlos, you're going to be angry at me for this. I was hoping that I could speed through things enough to hear people's thoughts, both from their skeptical side, like, do you believe this or not? Which is important for me. Would this work in your classroom? And if you would like to try it, or even if you don't want to try it, what would be the biggest barriers for you? Instead of sending people to another breakout room, I'm hopeful that we can get people to think about these for 30 seconds or so. And for any of these questions, weigh in the chat. Some of the biggest research projects I've ever been on have come from a chat comment. So please, I promise you, anything you write, I will pour over. But let's take about a minute and let's see what you think. And then we have a little time for discussion. Oh, Nick, great question. We'll definitely get to it. I'm going to give 30 more seconds or so, and then I'm going to dive into some of these questions. These are excellent. Oh man, I don't know. I have no idea what I want to talk about the most. Okay, I'm going to dive in here. How does this compare to other less traditional, other new, evidence-based exam strategies? We don't know, but watch for some work coming out soon, especially from my colleagues at Everett Community College, who do some really fascinating work especially in test question templates, which is a different way of getting at some of the same problems. I think that as the field realizes that more active classes are better, that a decade later, we're starting to say, well, if we're teaching more actively, the exams need to rise to the occasion. And so I think that we in this group, and all 45 of us, we are kind of leading that vanguard if you're interested in it. Nick asks, what happens when the questions inadvertently end up on Course Hero? And that is a problem. Most of the time that students pull questions from our public exams, they often, I will have students come to me and say, I found this question on Course Hero. I can't do any of this, because the mental model is that they would see it, read it once, and be able to answer it. But what we're really asking to do is see it, take it home, play with it, sleep on it, try it with other people, experiment. And that's such a bigger thinking process that the level of questions we ask can go up a lot. So I've been really happy that students have not found going to Course Hero or Chegg useful for these kind of exams, which was part of why we started designing it that way in the first place. I don't think it's a mystery at all that Course Hero is funding this work, in large part because they want to be part of the solution to a problem that is making them a lot of money. Nick, I hope that's okay for an intro answer. Hillary, point very well taken. Rick asks, have you used it with an online class? Yes. In fact, the experiments that you're seeing about student preference, that was a completely online 300 student class. And we see really, really similar things online and in person. Rachel says, I already use a lot of case study scenarios as part of exams. It sounds like an easy adaptation. I hope what we are doing is generating research so that you can go to your department chair and say, I want to do these new kinds of things that are in my style. And now you have a research backing for it. That would be the absolute perfect use of what we're doing. And Melinda asks, I think this is a crucial question. How well does this work for students who have lots of other commitments outside of class? I think that increased complexity makes it harder, but that we're more than balancing that out, or hopefully at least balancing it out by being more directive about what the core concepts are. So the efficiency will, I think at worst, balance out the complexity and may even make it a lot better. Talitha, good comment. Oh, I love how you're talking about barriers. Vic asks, is there a way to question bank these? What I have reused is the entire question wholesale and then just use something different for the hidden stuff. That you usually hide stuff that isn't just one possible word, like, oh, it's one of these 40 different chemical compounds. And so one year I choose 2 of them. The next year I choose numbers 3 and 4. And so it may make it more efficient for faculty in some ways. Yes, thank you, Greg, for putting that link. TQTs are something that you absolutely should read about. Awesome. I was going to end here, and I apologize that I'm ending late, by saying there are way, way more questions to answer than we have possibly touched. And we hope to continue this work. We're in press now at PLOS One. I hope you'll see more of that. If you are interested at all in being part of this, especially if you already do exams that are like this and you want to hitch this name and this research backing to your work, I would love to hear from you. And we're starting to get a loose network of people that are trying this, from American politics to organic chemistry and lots of different variations around and in between. So if you're interested, please reach out. My email is here. I'm easy to find, and I'd love to talk to you. And it's no surprise that a bunch of people who have done that in the past are now essentially our research team. It's 2:01. Thank you so much, Falcon, for giving me an opportunity to talk. I'm going to save the chat immediately so I can harvest all your ideas and later take credit for them as my own. Thank you, everybody. And I will hang out for questions if I can be helpful at all. Thank you so much. And
This was
Carlos?
awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I was wondering if you had a couple of minutes, if people had 1 or 2 questions.
Yes. I have a daughter to pick up. I know exactly when I have to walk out of the house. Every second until then, I'm here.
And I'm going to turn off